We have a guest joining us on this broadcast. We have Major General Shashi Asthana. Is a defense analyst joining us on this broadcast here. I also have with me Dr. Sharad Kohli, economist, joining us on this broadcast. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, foreign affairs expert, with us on this broadcast. And also I have with me Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, is a senior journalist, foreign affairs editor of Hindustan Times. The first question, if I could take to Dr. Sreeram Chaulia here. Dr. Sreeram, as was expected, US has now come out in support of India, with the top US senator acknowledging that for the sake of grabbing Indian territory, the PLA would have provoked the clash at the LAC. We would like to know from you, understand what does the support signal for India?
Yeah, over time, the US Congress, Mitch McConnell is a major representative of the Republican Party in the US Congress. A bipartisan level in the US political system, the distaste and fear and suspicion of China has increased, and COVID-19 has multiplied that anxiety about China and China's rise. And there is a determination among the policy elites, especially in the legislature, to challenge Chinese hegemony and counterbalance it. But on the other hand, I would not go too far into believing that the Trump administration, which is the executive arm, is really intent and has a strategy in place to fully contain China. So, for example, Trump himself has been rather non-committal on the Galwan clash and the violence and the brutality of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. He has hardly commented on it. So there is a division in the US polity. It's not absolutely clear that all arms of government are unified with a clear and coherent strategy to check Chinese power and Chinese aggression. So most of the laws that are coming in to sanction Chinese officials about what's happening in Xinjiang or Hong Kong or other human rights or trade-related issues, they come from different segments of the US polity. If you add up all of it, it does mean more pressure on China. But whether India can coordinate with the United States, the problem with Trump particularly and his circle is that they are not very good at building these vast coalitions of like-minded countries to try and push back Chinese aggression. They tend to think in terms of unilateral one-on-one basis. So the trade war that Trump did with China did not particularly damage it, because at the end of the day, Trump did a deal with China. So now he is taking an anti-China rhetorical posture because he has an election coming up and he needs to show that, the massive deaths in the US from coronavirus, he needs someone to scapegoat. So there he's attacking China. But I don't know how far he will go. He's always ready for a deal. That's the problem with Trump. He's very transactional. And the Chinese know it. And the Chinese, interestingly, elites have come out openly saying that they would prefer Trump to win the election in November than to have Joe Biden become the US president, because he's more like a mainstream liberal internationalist who will challenge China on human rights, on trade, on geopolitics, every arena. So China has gotten a free pass from the US so far. So one should not get carried away with this American pressure, which McConnell and all have always been hawkish against China. Marco Rubio, some of these, Republican faces are very, very anti-China. So are many Democrats. We should work with those elements. India's strategy has always been, so what if Trump himself is uncoordinated and lacking in strategic acumen? We should try and ally with whoever in the US system has a problem with China, because for end of the day, enemy's enemy is our friend. And right now, the way the Chinese are aggressively trying to apply pressure on us, we need the US, we need many other partners, we need many others in our own region, be it Vietnam, be it Indonesia, be it Australia, all the countries that are being harassed, Japan. Everybody needs to come together right now, and this is the real challenge for us. So the US is welcome, at least some element of the US establishment, as long as they are clear-eyed about China. It's good news for us. But we should not be jumping in joy, because this is just the beginning of a long process. Counterbalancing a rising hegemon like China is not an overnight task or something that can be accomplished easily. What happens after the US elections? Will they go cold on China? Will they drop the whole idea of confrontation and go back to accommodation? Because now the political needs of Trump or Biden are served and we no longer need to. So there are lots of question marks about how steady, sustained the US pressure on China will be. But we welcome it. We also didn't mind the trade war between China and the US. Dr. Jaishankar said openly that if it helps to create China, to moderate China and make it more balanced in its trade approach to other countries, good. So I think China needs a pushback, and if it's
Hmm.
coming from the US Congress, I think we will take that.
Dr. Sreeram, that's the point there. Going by what Dr. Kohli is suggesting here is that, it would be really difficult to end China's control of the global supply chain. And, even as we talk about becoming Atmanirbhar and, becoming self-reliant and may think of making India as an alternative global supply chain giant, it doesn't really look really viable at this point in time. It might take a very long time to achieve that.
Well, I think it's a medium term thing. It's not a long term thing. The transition is going to happen because, as capital flees, I mean, trillions were pumped into China, especially from the US and from Europe over the last 30 years, since the end of the Cold War. And that's how China became a colossus. So the West, especially Western corporates and finance and Wall Street, all of them had a big hand in making China this so-called indispensable or monopolistic power that it is today. So I think the real issue is with whether politicians in the US or in Europe can actually make more national security-based arguments to wean away their corporates and their banks and their financial capitalists to move away from China. I mean, to some extent, the US trade war with China over the last 3 years did some damage. It was not huge, but look at the diversion of manufacturing to Vietnam, for example. Vietnam benefited tremendously over the last 2 to 3 years because a lot of companies relocated from the Shenzhen, from the Pearl River Delta of China to Vietnam, which had comparable or even superior conditions. We hope in India, Prime Minister said that we should be, we want to awaken the states of India, become we're like sleeping giants to be able to receive some of the diversionary, capital moving FDI, moving away from China. The capital outflows from China are not massive, but they're underway. Japan has created a fund now. Japan is another big country that has been interdependent on China for a long time, or in a way dependent also, like the US. But now, they are encouraging more and more manufacturing at home. So I think some of these economic nationalism, I mean, Trump, as we all agree, does not have any focus and cannot really bring about China's downfall. But that strain of economic nationalism that Trump, Peter Navarro, the people around him have can be beneficial in the overall task of reducing, Chinese power. Because our goal in India, it's quite clear. I mean, see, when we say Pathankot or Uri, or when we say Pulwama, we believe that we have conventional superiority and we can prevail over Pakistan. The fact is, we don't have conventional superiority over China. That doesn't mean we will not take action. We are going to take action and we are going to make sure these invaders are repelled. But what I'm saying is that imbalance, that asymmetry, where China is sitting on top of our heads and trying to behave like a hegemon, that can only be overcome through a determined pushback. This is a political decision that elites have to convince and take their people along. If you go by consumer behavior, yes, China is indispensable worldwide. The cheapest and relatively high quality products come from them. But I think boycott or divestment or disinvestment, whatever you want to call it, these processes, decoupling, these have to happen because otherwise we have not learned the lessons of coronavirus, forget Galwan Valley.
Dr. Sreeram here wants to make a point.
We talked about between China and the US, the Chinese are warning that American hawks are pushing them towards a new Cold War. This is going to be very different from the old Cold War. The old Cold War was very geopolitical and both sides had a lot of military interventions in different parts of the world. They destabilized the whole world and they forced countries to make choices, and then we took a stand of non-alignment. I think this time India is bigger and more nimble and we have more flexibility. And I believe that this time around, this new Cold War, it is clear where our alignment is. I mean, Galwan Valley simply reminded us where our alignment needs to be. But I think this is not just between two power centers like US and China. What we want is actually a bigger coalition, especially of middle and small powers, to be able to all come together to handle the Chinese behemoth. The way they are trying to bully and the way they are trying to use propaganda to try and rub it in to victim countries. That needs to stop. And the pushback can only happen It's not a bipolar world where there's US versus China. That is there. Those are the two big powers. But we need to. India has to play a much more different role this time than what was the case during the old Cold War. And new Cold War, I don't think we're going to see it as so destructive. It's not going to be so destructive. It is more about alignment and positioning and pushback and security competition. I don't see wars and open
Right.
wars like we had in the past. So I think it's something that
Right.
we may actually have to welcome at a strategic level. There are some people who say, oh, Cold War is bad, it will destroy all sides, and it is bad for the people of the world. But I think now we have to take a political position. This is not
Right,
just
sir.
about consumer welfare. This is a political question where India's dignity, our honor, and our great power ambitions are at stake. And we are going to welcome this new Cold War if it helps us to find a balance of power in Asia.
Take it
All
as
right.
well,
So a lot of
they can't.
insecurities that that China is dealing with at this point in time, and the world even knows what China is up to, and would be will of course India at this point in time has to be really cautious enough, take a cautious approach in dealing with China, keeping its allies in mind as well, taking their support as well at this point in time. Meanwhile, thank you so much to all my panelists for joining us on this broadcast, sharing those inputs with us. Thank you so much.